Okay, so here we are live once again with another G.I. Joe classified unboxing. And this one is Wetsuit. And there we go, Wetsuit with a hyphen. I even checked to make sure that that was the case. Let me make sure my video is running. Yeah, there we go. All right. So in 1986, there were a lot of characters introduced into the G.I. Joe mythos, as there usually are. But a lot of these characters that were introduced in this particular year was, replacement type characters for, previous specialties in the line. Blue White Mario is here and says, hello. You said hello. I try to, usually. I'll say it again. Hello. but yeah, there had been replacement characters previously. Like, I guess technically you could consider Roadblock to be a replacement of Rock and Roll, since they were both Machine Gunner, but they kind of reclassified Rock and Roll as a light machine gunner, and Roadblock was always the heavy machine gunner. So technically, he wasn't really a replacement for Roadblock. 1985 was when we saw like kind of the first real replacements. Like Footloose was the new infantry guy instead of Grunt, and Bazooka, as the code name might indicate, was supposed to be at least somewhat of a replacement for Zap, who was the original Bazooka soldier. But of course, by that time, Larry had convinced them that, let's face it, Bazooka soldiers were kind of archaic by that point. Hell, they were kind of archaic like when Larry Hama himself was in the military during Vietnam. So, nowadays you have armor piercing, rocket launchers. So make him an RPG guy instead. Made sense. Not role playing game, although Bazooka probably would be into role playing games also. I don't see why he couldn't do both. But yeah, so but 1986 had a ton of like replacement characters, like Leatherneck. Do I happen to have Leatherneck over here? Because I had to have Leatherneck for my Wetsuit unboxing. Leatherneck was the new Marine. Dial Tone was the new communications guy. Sci-Fi was the new laser rifle trooper. Then you like Mainframe was a new specialty, and we got Mainframe coming up for classified also. It's a very heavy in the 1986 in the newest round that I have. But Wetsuit was the new Navy SEAL to replace Torpedo. And I know some people have a vast preference between one or the other. A lot of people, like Wetsuit better and feel like Torpedo is kind of a bland figure. And a lot of people think that Wetsuit is a much more realistic scuba diver, frogman type figure over Wetsuit. And the Torpedo is by far the superior figure. But to me, the interesting thing about these guys, both of them, and I like both, honestly. I think they both have their strong points. The interesting thing to me about these guys is that they're both considered to be Navy SEALs. And it seems like every time you had a figure in the vintage line that was labeled a Navy SEAL, what they really meant was Frogman. I think what was Tracker, I think was his name, that came with an inflatable, like an actual inflatable little raft for him. I think that was the only Navy SEAL that they put out in the vintage line that wasn't a Frogman. And even then, him coming with a raft might imply that he was thought of as more of an aquatic guy. And he wasn't really a very realistic military figure either. He was another guy wearing a sports jersey. And I think he had yellow pants that were tucked into his socks. Like I know Tracker's got his fans, but what I'm saying is he wasn't exactly like what I think of when I think of a Navy SEAL. And then again, neither is a Wetsuit or Torpedo, because those guys are frogmen. They're scuba divers. And the Frogman has a long history in GI Joe, going all the way back to like the 1960s with the 12-inch figure, where those wetsuits, not to be confused with the character, I'm talking about the actual garments they're wearing. The wetsuits that they made for the vintage GI Joe line were basically made out of like inner tube material, and they're not very sturdy in the long term. I guess they didn't figure on adult collectors still like buying and selling these things like well into the 21st century. Here we are, like a quarter of the way into the 21st century, and you still got adult collectors that were kids. They're guys in their 60s and 70s now, and they're still collecting like the vintage GI Joe stuff. And I know some guys who own the original scuba sets, and he's talking about, yeah, I keep it in a little wooden box that's sealed up, and I don't let light touch it. And I'm like, well, so you don't ever like take it out or anything? Like, well, no, sometimes I have to take it out because I have to rub it down with oil to make sure that it doesn't get dry rotted. And I'm like, dude, you just bought chores, man. That's what you did. I could never own something like that. And like, I know the people who own it, it's like a passionate thing, and they love having something like that, because it's a part of their childhood, really. And I get it. But to me, I could never own something like that because I kind of feel like there's a lot of responsibility to owning something that's so fragile and so delicate and requires so much maintenance to take care of it. And if you don't do it right, it's going to crumble to dust, like literally. So I couldn't handle that responsibility. I'm glad that my GI Joes had their wetsuits molded to their bodies, and I'm not going to have to worry about any of that. Before I get on further with this review, I do want to mention that we did have another tragic loss this week. I already talked about Rob Reiner, and I've got like those Princess Bride action figures that I'm going to be opening up soon in homage to that guy. But we also lost yesterday Gil Gerard, who, kids my age would remember growing up watching him as Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, which was one of my favorite shows when I was a kid. So rest in peace, Gil Gerard. I did want to mention that real quick. Unfortunately, don't have any Buck Rogers action figures to open up, but he's always going to be an action figure in my heart. I did have the old Mego Buck Rogers action figures, which I really enjoyed. Anyway, there's the portrait of Wetsuit over here. It's actually like a full figure of him because I guess they wanted to show off that scuba gear. This is figure 179 in the G.I. Joe Classified series. We got a nice action shot of Wetsuit on the back with this little ski sled thing. And that's something that they had in the original G.I. Joe line in the 1960s. They had like a little ski sled kind of thing. It was much larger than this. And a lot of that stuff, a lot of the scuba stuff in the 60s G.I. Joe line was very much influenced by Thunderball, which is a very popular movie at the time, James Bond. And there was a lot of scuba stuff going on in that movie. And that kind of carried over into the 1980s G.I. Joe line. A lot of people working on that grew up with the original G.I. Joe. And so they had a lot of homage to the original 12-inch G.I. Joe in A Real American Hero. And I kind of feel like Wetsuit with his little ski sled thing, that was kind of one of those influences. Now, the original Wetsuit figure, one of the little paper thing fell out. I got these things all over the place. You see the insert. It's got the little G.I. Joe Stars and Stripes logo on there. The original Wetsuit figure did not come with any offensive weapons, which is kind of, if you're debating, who's better between Torpedo and Wetsuit, well, there's a point in Torpedo's column right there, because at least he had a spear gun. But Wetsuit did have some accessories that were not removable, molded to his body type accessories. So he did have a pistol and a knife that were molded to his leg. And you can see that wetsuit does indeed come with a pistol. And this to me does not look like any real world pistol that I'm familiar with. And I could be mistaken about that because, like I said, I'm not like an expert in firearms or anything. But it does look like it's more of a fantastic design for a pistol. And when I'm looking at it closely, it looks like it's got 4, maybe 5 barrels on it. It looks like a square barrel when you first kind of look at it, but then you look at the front, you notice there's at least 4 little holes in there. It looks like there might be a 5th hole, but that might just be the space between the 4 barrels. So what I think this is supposed to be is kind of a mini spear gun. So something that can actually work underwater. Like I said, even though this guy was labeled as a Navy SEAL, he was a frogman. That's what he really was as far as like the function of the figure. Now, Larry Hama, of course, knows what a Navy SEAL really is. So in the comic book, he actually did give us an issue. I think it was yearbook number 4. He actually did give us an issue where it was a wetsuit torpedo team up, and they both got to change into some camo fatigues and tote a rifle through a swamp and actually function the way that Navy SEALs are supposed to function as commandos. So there's the helmet, looking very much like the helmet that the original figure had. Of course, that helmet was molded to his head, but this one is removable, thankfully. And it's got the little lights at the top, so he can be exploring in the darkest part. One thing that I wish that they did with this helmet that would have been cool is a lot of the times they showed wetsuit wearing the helmet in the cartoon and in the comic book both. I noticed a lot of the times they show wetsuit wearing the helmet but without wearing the rebreather. And I think that would have been a cool feature to have if they could have made the rebreather removable, and then you could display wetsuit as just wearing the helmet without that. And of course, wetsuit would oftentimes go just unmasked on the cartoon as well. Did I show the knife? I don't know if I showed the knife, but here's the knife. It's a rather nasty looking knife, and it's got a little loop at the bottom of it. So I would think that he could put like a cord around that loop, and then he could more easily carry it and not worry about dropping it underwater. Kind of wrap it around his wrist. Speaking of which, there's a little loop on this flashlight too. He came with this big old flashlight, just like the vintage figure. And you can see like the lights on the heads. They have a little bit of silver paint on there. Give it a little bit of the touch of realism. And then we got this backpack, which looks very much like the backpack that the original wetsuit came with. So you can see it's supposed to be kind of a fancy air supply kind of backpack. It doesn't look like scuba tanks, but it was good enough for us when we were kids that we could just kind of pretend. If I can get the little sled thing out of there, there's that. And if we look at it on the package, you can see he's supposed to grab a hold of it by those things there. I'm guessing that's why they got those. Those are probably for his thumbs to fit into. But it looks kind of thick to me to fit into the action figure's hands. So I'm probably not going to want to leave it in his hands too much. It does look like his hands are kind of designed to hold something a little more thick like that. So we'll see once we get him out of the package. And then finally, the last wetsuit accessories. What you want a scuba diver to have is a pair of swim fins. And these are nice looking swim fins. They're kind of dangerous looking. They look like something like you could imagine a sea predator is having. And they do have some paint detailing on there. They've got that kind of teal coloring like most of wetsuits. Most of wetsuit are colored this way. It's got some treads on the bottom, very nicely detailed. These are really nice swim fins. I like these swim fins quite a bit better than the usual swim fins we had, like the ones with torpedo and the eel, which were pretty much the same swim fins if I remember correctly. I like that design a little better. I kind of wish they'd have they'd have had these ready to give them to the eel instead. I think these are a better fit than the swim fins the eel actually came with. But whatever. Again, we can see it matches that sort of teal coloring that's on the figure. And he looks like, to me, he reuses a lot of parts from Wetsuit, or I'm sorry, from Torpedo, which makes sense because, he's another guy in a wetsuit. Why go through all the trouble of, making a brand new wetsuit figure when we can use the same figure that we used for, a lot of the same parts we used on, Torpedo and, the actual Navy Frogman figure that was basically just a repainted Torpedo, and the eel, which was basically just a repainted Torpedo. Well, we've still got all these Torpedo parts. Might as well use them on Wetsuit. So we were talking about, on the last episode, Bobby Wald hasn't shown up yet. At least not that I know of. He hasn't said anything yet. But we talked a little bit about how this guy looks kind of like, was it Christopher McDonald is the name of the actor, I believe, that played Shooter McGavin in Happy Gilmore. And very popular, very famous comedic actor, usually plays kind of a blustering jerk. He's really good at that. But he's just a good actor in general. And I've seen him, play some other parts that aren't necessarily like in that sort of wheelhouse. He was on Star Trek The Next Generation on Yesterday's Enterprise, which is an episode that I really enjoyed, where he played a crewman on the Enterprise C, I think it was, that had somehow accidentally traveled into the future, into the time of the Enterprise D. And this was like an Enterprise that was like a doomed ship, and it was a fixed point in time. Like they were supposed to go down fighting against, I think it was the Romulans. And that was something that really earned the respect of the Klingon people. And a big part of the reason why the Klingons wound up becoming allies of the Federation. So it was really important, even though they knew that they knew that they were going to die. It was still very important that they go back in time and fulfill their destiny. And honestly, some of them kind of faced a fate worse than death. But we won't get into too much of that right now. This isn't a video talking about Star Trek. Although I probably should do more videos talking about Star Trek because I enjoy talking about it. But like we were talking about how he looks kind of like Christopher McDonald. And, it's not enough that he could sue them, but certainly enough that, somebody who looks at this figure could be like, is that Shooter McGavin? But honestly, I kind of feel like that that fits the design of what Wetsuit looked like on the cartoon as well. And in fact, why don't I just look it up? Wetsuit, G.I. Joe, Sunbow. I kind of feel like that this is a fairly decent, it could be better in some ways. I'll get into that. But I feel like it's a fairly decent likeness of what Wetsuit actually looked like on the old cartoon, if we have a look at him. So I'm trying to find a good picture of him. I put specifically Sunbow, and it's giving me all these pictures of action figures and comic books. And I'm like, I put Sunbow for a reason, guys. What are you doing, Google? So here's an image of what Wetsuit looked like on the cartoon. And I normally think of him as having that somewhat grumpy expression because he's like that kind of guy, He's one of these G.I. Joe characters. It's like he's hardcore military, you know what I mean? And this one actually is probably like would be a better shot, but it's really freaking digitized. But to me, he looks a lot like how the character looked on the cartoon, and they even gave him like the kind of curly hair like that he had on the cartoon. Although I think that this is a little bit of a shorter haircut. See, it's like a little more sort of like an afro there. And here it's a little more sort of, a little shorter, but it's still curly. It still has that sort of look to it. So I think that they did a good job with this head sculpt. whether or not it looks like Shooter McGavin. Sean Franklin is here, and he says hi. Hi, right back at you, Sean Franklin. Good to see you. So yeah, and then the uniform is pretty close to how I remember the uniform as being on the original figure, but I seem to remember the original figure as having. Oh, I guess he didn't. Looks like he didn't. I seem to remember the original figure as having gloves, but it looks like I was remembering wrong because looking at the original figure, it's kind of washed out there on the camera. But looking at the original figure, he did not have gloves. He did have 2 black wristbands, which are gray on this version, and he's got the gray pistol and knife holsters, like I was talking about, and he's got these rather tall boots that I think they're definitely supposed to be boots on the original figure, but on this one they just kind of recolored from the knee down. They recolored it. Actually, it was colored black to begin with, wasn't it? So I guess they recolored everything but that. I guess put it that way. And you can see that the white panel on the original wetsuit, you can still kind of make it out on there. It doesn't reach down quite as far as it does on this one. It reaches down about like just below his rib cage, but on this one it reaches all the way down to like where the belt should be. The belt kind of slipped down a little bit. And he's got the white stripe down the side, like the original figurehead. For the most part, I feel like this is pretty accurate to the original wetsuit figure. They did take a few liberties here and there, but for the most part, pretty accurate. I think most people would. Most G.I. Joe fans, most people familiar with the G.I. Joe characters would see this guy and be like, "Oh yeah, wetsuit. I remember him." And always arguing with Leatherneck. So we got to see them together, right? You can't have wetsuit without Leatherneck and vice versa. Although having them next to each other like that does kind of make it a little more glaringly obvious that they made Leatherneck too short in the classified series, which was unfortunate. So it's a nice figure, but I still might make my own. I was already planning on making my own custom Leatherneck, and I might just consider doing that in the future. I've still got the parts that I've pulled aside. Go ahead and put together my version of Leatherneck, who would be the proper height. So let's talk about his articulation. Wetsuit can look up about that far, look down about that far, tilt his head kind of from side to side, rotate the head all the way around. Of course, the arms rotate all the way around at the shoulders. And they've got that butterfly joint to them, so you can move the shoulders back about that far and forward about that far. He does have a bicep swivel, so the bicep rotates all the way around. He's got double jointed elbows. That's about the range of motion you get at the elbows. He's got wrists that rotate all the way around, and the right wrist has a horizontal hinge, which moves back and forth like so. And the left wrist has a horizontal hinge that moves back and forth like so. He's got an ab crunch, so wetsuit can bend forward about that far. Oh, no, he's got the bends. He came up too fast, and he can bend back about that far. And when I try to bend him back, I notice it's a little bit gummy, and I can see a little bit of space here where like the abdominal piece is almost trying to break apart. A human being should not be able to bend back that far. He's like a contortionist or something. And he does have this cool web gear that goes around the torso of the figure, but it doesn't seem to hinder the articulation at all because it's very narrow and the articulation is really good. He can bend from side to side about that far. The whole, ab piece is kind of wobbly. It's got that sort of wobble to it. Kind of like the old 1980s G.I. Joe, but this isn't an O-ring. This is a ball and socket articulation, but still it reminds me a lot of the old 1980s G.I. Joe articulation, so I appreciate that. And of course, rotates all the way around at the waist. Wetsuit can kick up about that far. He does have a thigh cut, so the thigh rotates all the way around. But I'm not going to rotate it all the way around because of the holster. It just seems like that would just kind of get in the way. But in theory, it should rotate all the way around. It rotates enough around, even with the holster being in the way. He's got double jointed knees. That's about the range of motion you get at the knees. He does have a boot cut at the ankles, so it rotates all the way around. And the ankle points down about that far, points up about that far, and then the ankle rotates all the way around where the ankle meets the foot. So typical G.I. Joe Classified articulation, which is to say, very good articulation. Some of the best articulation that you're likely to get on an action figure, short of like McFarlane or NECA. They might get a little fancier. No, so they did actually, I notice, I'll show you in just a second. It looks like they did actually use the teal colored plastic for the lower legs and then painted it, but you can see it's unpainted at the knee, so that's unfortunate. I think they probably should just use black plastic there, and that would have solved that problem. So let's have a look at Wetsuit with some of his accessories. And we've got this pistol, and like I said, the original one did not come with any kind of offensive weapon, but at least this guy has a pistol. So there we go. He can at least shoot somebody if he has to. And like I said, it looks like it's almost intended to be like a kind of micro mini spear gun. So you could imagine him using that underwater as well. It's not like a standard firearm. I think that's what it's intended to be, is like a small little spear gun. And you can see it fits in his holster quite nicely. And then I'm going to put this in the left hand, since, you know, the sheath is on the left thigh. But there he is with the knife, so he can make stabby. Now, like I said, the original Wetsuit did have these accessories molded onto the figure, but they were not removable. So like most 80s figures had various guns and knives and grenades that, you know, were molded onto the figure that weren't removable, but you know, they gave the figure some character. But when I was a kid, I always wished that, you know, the knives and the pistols were removable, and that I could take them off and have them use these extra weapons in a fight. And of course, now Wetsuit can do that, so that's really cool. Oh, I should point out he has the little pouches those are like separate pieces that can kind of move around or be removed. If for some reason you didn't want them to have pouches on there, you could take them off. All right, so let's go ahead and we got one more accessory. Well, actually technically two more accessories that can fit in his hand, and both of them fell on the floor. Why do you do this? Thankfully, they fell somewhere I could find them rather easily. So, but he does have the backpack. You can go ahead and put on the backpack. And then he's got this flashlight. That'll fit in his hand. And then the little ski sled thing allegedly should fit in his hand. We'll see how well that does. And like I said, it's got this little notch on it, which to me that looks like where his thumb is supposed to go. So that can maybe help out with that a little bit. But I kind of feel like that this probably should have been, like I said, it looks like they tried to make the hands so that they can fit around this. But it's going to be tricky to actually get it into his hand, I think. And even with it putting it like where that space where the thumb is, it's just there's not quite enough room for him to grip this properly. So I can kind of have him like the fingers won't quite reach to wrap around it. And it's like I could get the fingers to reach like to the edge of this little, I don't know what you call it, a little pylon or something like that. But they don't want to quite reach all the way. But I do have him gripping it in the, at least like the thumb, just the thumb is what's holding that in there. And it doesn't seem like it's holding it in there that well. But if you just wanted to have him posed on the shelf with this thing for whatever reason, you can do that. But I don't think they did as good a job of designing that as they could have. I'm a little disappointed with how that works. I think they probably should have had like more of a bespoke handle on here for him to grab a hold of. I think that would have worked better. Grant G asks, how many G.I. Joe figures do you have now? You really think I can count that high at this point? So I've got like, I don't have all of the G.I. Joe Classified series. There are quite a few of those that I'm missing, and most of those are things that are like convention exclusives or something like that. I don't have all of those. And I don't have all the vintage figures, and I don't have all the 25th anniversary figures, but I do have a lot. And then we've got figures that aren't even really technically GI Joe figures, but they're still GI Joe figures. I like to buy the Marauder gun runners, like their figures, and make my own GI Joe characters. So I've got tons of those. So yeah, I've got a lot of GI Joe. GI Joe is what I consider to be the greatest action figure line of all time, and certainly like the granddaddy of all action figures. So we wouldn't have action figures if we didn't have GI Joe. GI Joe was the first and most important action figure line ever made. And maybe Star Wars might be number 2 as far as most important, since that's where we really got like little 3 3/4 inch figures. But here he is with the backpack all set up. So, and you see the hoses are articulated, so it was a little easier to fit them into the backpack than I would have thought, because you can see there's not a lot of slack there. And then also he's got these two on the backpack, these two tiny little pegs, and there actually are two tiny little holes on the web gear, so the backpack has a little bit more surface area of the web gear to fit into. So yeah, I'm not gonna have him holding this thing even in the thumbnail, because I don't think he can hold it very well. And Grant G says, I saw someone online selling that massive ship playset, the aircraft carrier. I never had the aircraft carrier when I was a kid. I'm still a little bitter about that. Just a little bitter. I can understand my mom's thought process in not buying me the aircraft carrier. She probably figured he'd play with it once or twice and then be done with it. And then it'd just be like this big thing taking up space in his room. So, he can pretend to cardboard box as his aircraft carrier. And I did. So she was right about that, I guess. I also pretended cardboard boxes were the silent tower, since we never got a place out of that at all. But I did have Snake Eyes climbing up that thing and swinging around it and trying to rescue Scarlet from Destro and his forces. So I had a lot of fun with it. You don't really need a fancy play set if you got cardboard boxes. You just kind of draw a Cobra symbol on the front and draw some windows here and there and stack the smaller box on top of the bigger box. And then you've got plenty of surface area to play with. You can set up like a little throne room in there and all kinds of cool stuff. So yeah, cardboard boxes, the kids' ultimate playset. Figures not included. Figures sold separately. But anyway, Wetsuit's a pretty cool figure, and I'm pretty happy about how he turned out. It is a shame that the only offensive weapons this guy comes with are the little gun and the little knife. But at least he does have a little gun and a little knife. So that's one up on the vintage figure that just had that stuff permanently molded to his legs, never to be removed. And he also has a removable helmet, which allows us to see his face, which I feel like is fairly accurate. Not 100% accurate to the cartoon, but fairly accurate. They maybe modernize his haircut a little bit. He doesn't quite have the Mike Brady haircut going on anymore, but I think it still looks good. I think it still fits the character, even if it does look a little bit like Shooter McGavin. That's not a bad thing. But yeah, like Wetsuit's one that I was happy to have him, but I wasn't like super excited about Wetsuit. You know what I mean? Like he was one I'm like, oh cool, Wetsuit. I'll be happy to have him, but also not kind of like, oh, I've been waiting for Wetsuit so long. Like a guy that I'm really super excited about is actually Mainframe. Yes, I'm the nerd who really likes Mainframe. So he's going to be the next member of the G.I. Joe team that we open up, but not the next G.I. Joe figure, because that one's going to be this guy. We're going to go. Well, I've been trying to alternate with the heroes and the villains while I've been opening these up. So that's going to be this guy, the Grim Viper. But if you're like me, you saw him, you're like, oh, cool. They put out a new Range Viper figure. because I wasn't able to get the Range Viper that was a Walmart exclusive and terribly distributed. And I don't feel like paying like over $100 for a Range Viper. But this guy, to me, like he looks like he's gonna scratch that itch for me. As far as he's gonna be my Range Viper figure. I don't care if the colors are different, and I might even like these accessories a little bit better than the ones that the actual Range Viper comes with. But we'll see how I react to this guy when we open him up, since technically this is supposed to be a new character, but it's the Range Viper. We all know it's really a Range Viper. And then the episode following that, then I will open up Mainframe, and that's the last of these basic G.I. Joe figures that I have to open. And we've got more stuff on the way. Like I said, I want to open up those Princess Bride figures fairly soon, and we'll have more Ninja Turtles in the near future. We'll have more G.I. Joe in the near future, and of course, we got more DC Multiverse in the near future. And not only do I have like the rest of these basic G.I. Joe figures, I have the Christmas episode figure, and I need to figure out when's a good day to do that. And I have those the 2-packs and the deluxe figures. I think they're all technically 2-packs, but some of them are 2-packs where it's a human character and an animal character. So that'd be Law and Order and the Desert Scorpion with his scorpion. And then I've got the 2-pack of Sergeant Slaughter and Mercer. So we do still have more G.I. Joe. And I got all those Super 7 reaction figures that I need to open. And those are, I'm going to just open up all those in one episode. So that way I don't have to talk about the articulation on a Super 7 reaction plus figure like 4 or 5 different times, however many of those I have. So we got a lot of cool stuff coming up. That's what I'm trying to say. So if you want to make sure you don't miss any of that, make sure that you like and subscribe and all the fun YouTube stuff down below. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think about Wetsuit, both the character in general and this figure specifically. And before we go, let's get one more shot of these two dude bros together. These the hetero life mates. The brothers from different mothers. Like you know, these guys are always sniping at each other, but you know it's done with love. These are two guys that, like, you know, they probably like go on leave together and go back home to visit each other's families. Like they're probably closer than brothers at this point. You know what I mean? Like these guys are inseparable. You can't have Wetsuit without Leatherneck, which is one of the reasons I was really glad that they finally did put out Wetsuit. Like that was something I was saying, man, I hope when I was opening up this guy, I'm like, man, I hope they're gonna put out Wetsuit soon, because I gotta have that duo there. So anyway, that's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. We will talk to you next time. Bye.